She was the apple of her father's eye, pampered, privileged, and proud. But when she defied him one too many times, he did the unthinkable, he forced her to marry a humble farmer from the countryside. She thought it was a cruel joke. Until the truth unraveled, and she almost fainted from the shock of what she discovered about the man she was now bound to. A tale of pride, punishment, secrets, and the power of transformation. Eleanor Winthrop, daughter of the illustrious steel tycoon Horace Winthrop, lived a life that sparkled with elegance and opulence. At 24, she had never once stood in a grocery line, washed a dish, or ridden in anything less than a chauffeured car. Raised among chandeliers, luxury handbags, and glittering soirees, Eleanor knew how to command attention, but lacked the humility to earn respect. She was stunning, there was no doubt. With cascading chestnut hair, piercing green eyes, and a wardrobe that rivaled Fashion Week itself, she was the very definition of high society. Educated at exclusive European boarding schools and fluent in 3 languages, she had everything, except perspective. Her father, Horace, had clawed his way up from poverty. Born to factory workers in Pittsburgh, he built his empire from the ashes of hardship. He adored his daughter but saw the growing chasm between her reality and the values that once defined him. The final blow came at a prestigious charity gala. Before a crowd of dignitaries, Eleanor mockingly imitated her father's blue-collar accent and interrupted his speech with a crude joke about manual labor. That night, Horace stood in his study, the firelight flickering across his stern face. If she can't respect her roots, maybe she needs to be replanted. The next morning, Eleanor awoke to a cold breakfast and a colder message. "You're leaving. I've chosen your husband. You'll marry him, or be cut off completely." Eleanor laughed, thinking it was a bluff. But within days, she was stripped of her credit cards, her phone confiscated, her designer bags packed in suitcases she didn't even recognize. A black SUV drove her across state lines and dropped her in the middle of nowhere. Waiting there, like a statue carved from earth and sunlight, stood her new husband, Owen Callahan. A humble farmer, with calloused hands and quiet eyes. Owen's world was a far cry from the marble floors and crystal chandeliers Eleanor was used to. His home was a modest cabin nestled between endless fields of wheat and wildflowers. No Wi-Fi. No butlers. Just creaking wooden floors, a stove that ran on firewood, and a backyard filled with clucking chickens. He wasn't cruel. But he wasn't accommodating either. "This isn't a punishment. It's a mirror," he said. "What you see in it is up to you." Eleanor rebelled fiercely. She locked herself in the room. She refused to eat meals with him. She made sarcastic comments about his flannel shirts and muddy boots. Every morning she sat on the porch wrapped in furs that looked absurd against the rustic backdrop, staring at the distant hills as if they might carry her back to Manhattan. But Owen, with his quiet resilience, never raised his voice. He worked sunrise to sunset, tending to crops, mending fences, and checking on the livestock. He'd leave her tea by the door. A book on the windowsill. A fresh flower by her seat at the table. Then came the storm. A violent thunderstorm swept through the region one night. Trees crashed. The roof leaked. Eleanor cried in fear. But Owen stayed up all night, placing buckets beneath leaks, gently laying towels under the windows. That night, she saw him differently. The next morning, Eleanor offered, awkwardly, to help him feed the chickens. He didn't say much. Just handed her a bucket. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor, to her own surprise, began to adapt. She burned her first loaf of bread. Then made a decent one. She fell off a horse. Then rode it again. She learned to sew buttons, patch clothes, and even start a fire. Owen shared little of his past. But Eleanor found herself watching him more closely, how he paused to listen to the wind, how he whispered calming words to a nervous animal, how he stood still as the sun set, as if communing with something deeper than himself. One evening, she asked about his family. He said they were gone. Both parents passed. That he'd left behind a life he couldn't live with. I used to chase things, he said. Now I try to grow them. She didn't know what that meant until later. In the attic one rainy afternoon, Eleanor stumbled upon a locked chest while searching for candles. It looked ancient, carved with initials and brass hinges. Hidden behind old quilts and dusty photo albums, it beckoned her curiosity. She opened it to find stacks of old letters, black and white photographs, and a brittle newspaper clipping. She smoothed the clipping with her hands and read the headline. Heir to a billion-dollar agricultural dynasty disappears. Below was a grainy photo of Owen, clean-shaven, in a tuxedo, smiling next to a group of businessmen. Heart pounding, she confronted him. He sighed deeply. Yes. That was me. My family owned Callahan Industries, massive farming corporations. But they became corrupt. Greedy. Patenting seeds, destroying small farmers. I couldn't be part of it. I gave it all up. Eleanor stood frozen. The humble man who smelled of hay and sun, was once wealthier than her own father. Why didn't you tell me? Because if I had, you wouldn't have seen me. Only the money. And I needed to see you too. Eleanor's heart was torn. The man she had once mocked, then respected, then loved, was no ordinary farmer. But that didn't make him less. It made him more. A man of principle. Just as they began planning a new life together, Horace returned. He arrived in a private jet, descending like a storm himself. Stepping out in a tailored suit, he demanded Eleanor return. You've made your point, Owen. You've tamed her. Now let's go back. But Eleanor refused. I'm not a dog to be trained. And this is not your lesson to end. This is my life now. Horace exploded. He offered Owen a blank check to walk away. Owen declined. Horace made veiled threats. That night, disaster struck. The barn caught fire. Flames engulfed the structure. Horses screamed. The wind howled. Owen didn't hesitate. He ran in. Eleanor followed but was pulled back by neighbors. Owen dragged two animals out before collapsing in the smoke. The investigation revealed security footage. The arsonist was on Horace's payroll. He was arrested for conspiracy and reckless endangerment. Horace's empire began to unravel. Shareholders pulled out. The media scandal grew. But Eleanor no longer cared about stocks, headlines, or public opinion. All she cared about was Owen, lying pale in a hospital bed. She stayed beside him every day, reading poetry, whispering stories, holding his hand. Until, finally, he stirred. "You stayed," he whispered. She nodded, weeping. "I will never leave you." They remarried, truly married this time, beneath the blooming apple tree in their orchard, surrounded by villagers who had become family. Years passed. Eleanor and Owen turned the farm into a community sanctuary. A place where city kids learned to plant seeds. Where troubled teens found peace in nature. Where families gathered every Sunday for home-cooked meals under the open sky. Eleanor became a storyteller, hosting podcasts and writing books about humility, second chances, and unexpected blessings. She never wore heels again. But her spirit stood taller than ever. And every spring, she'd walk to the apple tree, press her hand to its bark, and whisper. "Sometimes the life you're running from, is the life running toward you." The end.